Suella Bravman has told police chiefs that waving a Palestinian flag or singing a chant advocating freedom for Arabs may be a criminal offence. The Home Secretary has urged officers to clamp down on any attempts to use banners, songs and swastikas to harass or intimidate members of the Jewish community. So the past few days, hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters have gathered outside the Israeli embassy in London, letting off fireworks, lighting flares and chanting, "Israel is a terrorist state" and "Free Palestine." Meanwhile, in Sheffield, a demonstrator scaled the town hall to rip down the Israeli flag and replace it with a Palestinian one as crowds applauded below. This is really difficult, I think. I mean, I actually was just sitting at my desk this afternoon, minding my own business, and I looked up, and on the street outside, it was quite a quiet street actually, it was just a guy dressed all in black, waving a huge Palestinian flag on his own, walking down the street. And frankly, he looked really sinister. He was kind of covered up in a way you couldn't really see his identity. I recoiled at that. And I understand why the government, at a sensitive moment like this, particularly a kind of Conservative Home Secretary who's at the moment trying to show quite a lot of ankle to her own party, feels the need to come out and say, well, this is, this could be a criminal offence if you do this. It is undoubtedly extremely provocative at this time to go out and wave Palestinian flags. But I'm not sure you need new legislation of any sort, because the kind of things that we were just describing there, ripping down flags, well, I'm pretty sure that would be covered by some kind of vandalism. Breach of the peace, letting off flares is probably a risk of some sort to passers-by. So I don't think we should rush to criminalise things that we would normally put in the camp of a peaceful protest, and things that aren't a peaceful protest are covered by existing legislation.
But going back to JJ's point, isn't the fact that they are chanting things using Palestinian flags, they're celebrating what Hamas has done, and the police need to be more robust? I agree with you. If I'd seen that in my road, I would have been absolutely horrified.
Yeah.
I also have an issue with the virtue signalling of town halls. Why is Sheffield flying a flag at all?
It's a bit odd.
Yeah. I don't understand. Why have they done that? Because they're a local authority. They shouldn't be taking a political stance on geopolitical issues.
But the same happened with Ukraine, didn't it? I mean, the Ukrainian flags were everywhere, and we've just sort of now we're doing the same thing, and they are everywhere.
But why?
I don't know. It's not our fight, but it's solidarity, isn't it? A solidarity thing.
Yes, I mean we saw the Israeli flag lit up, as in a picture of it portrayed onto the front of Downing Street, and we often see things like that with Big Ben and so on. And I think it is a sign of solidarity. I completely take your point. I think banning a Palestinian flag is ludicrous. A Hamas flag, which is a designated terrorist group, that is already banned, and swastikas equally so. So I do think you can easily argue that that's race speech or race, hate imagery or so on. So I think it is covered already.
I spoke to my local rabbi today, and he said he's terrified, and his people are terrified of getting attacked in the streets.
Yeah.
But he made it clear, and we work together in the community across different groups. It's a very tiny, tiny minority of people who are going to go in the streets and shout anti-Semitic abuse. It's a tiny amount. Unfortunately, they're the ones who are going to do the most damage, but it's a tiny amount. There's a guy I spoke today called Turkish Hackney. Our local community will protect. If we see someone being anti-Semitic in the street, we will intervene. And I think that's going to be the case for most people in this country.
It is a real awakening for a lot of people. I mean, my son goes to a typical North London school, majority Jewish, very, very fun. And his sort of, his schoolmates' WhatsApp group was going crazy on Saturday with everybody talking about it, saying how worried they were about it. And funny enough, on Saturday afternoon, in our street, a car drove down, beeping its horn with a Palestinian flag. Very, very frightening. And again, we've had emails, and I know most Jewish schools, or even majority Jewish schools, have had emails from the head teacher saying we're going to take all these extra security measures. The boys and girls don't have to wear their blazers, so they're not identified as coming from a school that has so many Jewish children.
Isn't it absolutely
really frightening?
Horrific that this could be playing out on the streets of London. There is no need for that to be. I would have hoped that we would be in a better place than that.
But Jewish schools already have to have security. You know, you don't go to your normal state school and have security guards.
Yeah, this is
Jewish
not
schools already
something
have
new.
it. Yeah,
As I said, this is not new.
Yeah.
So, I mean, an interesting question here is is about the language we use, and you know what we were talking about there with Suella Bravman, what you can and can't chant. What about the BBC, who are still insisting that they are right not to describe Hamas militants as terrorists in their coverage? Defence Secretary Grant Shapps, he's condemned that. He said the policy is, quote, verging on disgraceful, and has said the BBC needs to find its moral compass. The BBC's argument is that they've never done otherwise, and that to call Hamas terrorists is taking sides. I can see, David, you're uncomfortable with that. And
but they're a prescribed terrorist organisation, and I think the BBC
it's
should...
not difficult, really, in my
Well,
view.
I don't think it's difficult, but we were talking about it earlier, weren't we? And the fact is, if the BBC has that sort of mantra across the board, but we were talking about the IRA as well.
No,
the fact is...
it's always. They've always said described as a terrorist organisation by the government or whatever else, but they've
just because someone's always done something, just because an organisation always has, doesn't mean it's the right
doesn't
thing
it mean they're
for our
shying away
times.
from actually confronting what's going on?
I'm not sure it does. And when we look at the use of language, I'm a Tottenham Hotspur supporter, and there's a horrible word that Spurs fans use to describe themselves, and other fans will say anti-Semitic things to Spurs fans who aren't Jewish. The police are not going down and arresting Spurs fans for saying this horrible word, you know? So,
Right.
So my point is that if you're not going to arrest people when they're using bad words already, why are you now going to be doing it because there's this conflict going on?
Sorry, I mean, I suppose actually the thing is about who describes a terrorist and where is the difference between a terrorist and a freedom fighter? It does depend on where you sit on the fence, and surely they're doing what they've said they will do. At the BBC, this is talking about by saying it is a prescribed
beheading babies is probably
no, but they can say Hamas is seen as a terrorist organisation.
But do they? I'm not sure they actually go that far.
No, so what they say is they will say the government calls Hamas or has designated Hamas a terrorist group, and then they will interview people who say they are terrorists, they're not terrorists. Then they will, and this is their argument, then they will say, yes, they have committed atrocities, they've committed a massacre, they've committed what could be seen as terrorist attacks, and they call them militants. And you can see why people think, well, that's dancing on the head of a pin. It's, why aren't they saying
What did they say at 9/11?
The same.
Exactly. It's always been the same. It's always been the same. So
even,
I mean, John Simpson wrote an article today about it, saying that even in the Second World War, the BBC guidelines were that they could not call Nazis evil. They could only call Nazis the enemy. They have always said, we do not judge, we present the facts. And I think somebody was saying earlier, it's a very good point. You know, Margaret Thatcher called Nelson Mandela a terrorist. The BBC refused to call Nelson Mandela a terrorist because they said, if we do that, we are taking sides. And so you can see that sometimes they end up being on the right side and sometimes they might end up being on the wrong side. But if you stick to your guns and say, we will never do this, it's a safer place to be. But at the moment, it's very, very uncomfortable. Now, one thing that people totally forget or choose to ignore is that Sky News, ITV News, The Times and The Independent all have the same editorial policy, but they don't get any criticism for it at all.
We don't get forced to pay for them.
That's true.
Yes.
That's true. But does anybody know that that's the policy? No. I don't think they do.
No. But I think, but Isabel's point is right about being a national broadcaster. We pay for it. Therefore, the government prescribes it as a terrorist organisation. Shouldn't the national broadcaster follow the guidelines?
But they do say that the government says it's a terrorist organisation.
It's a very difficult, and it's a subject that upsets a lot of people.
Viewers aren't likely to be confused really about whether these people are terrorists or not, are they?
That's
make
the
their
ultimate,
own mind up.
That's the ultimate point. Yeah, the viewers are clever enough to make up their own minds.